This year we celebrate 31 years of Metal Gear.
Metal Gear, Metal Gear, Metal Gear, Metal Gear, Metal Gear, Metal Gear.
31 years since Hideo Kojima series first appeared, bringing joy to millions and pushing the boundaries of what exactly a game can do and what it can be about. Over the course of this month, we'll explore this series with its many
nanomachines, nanomachines,
Nanomachines,
nanomachines, nanomachines, nanomachines, nanomachines,
nanomachines.
No, I mean its many iterations, its many ideas, its many flaws and wonderful, wonderful experiences. And we begin in the first stage of Metal Gear.
Metal Gear, Metal Gear.
When Hideo Kojima was just starting out, when Konami was still a company that people liked, when no one had heard of a PlayStation, when a Nintendo was still something relatively new, and somewhere in Japan there existed a computer called the MSX, one that had sparked a lot of discontent between Microsoft and Apple back in the day. As the legend goes, Konami was working on an action game for this computer, one that was supposed to let you as a player control a soldier that would mow down dozens of enemies that were shooting at you constantly all throughout your adventure. But there was one problem: the system could not handle the amount of enemies that the game was supposed to actually run around the screen and shoot you with bullets that you could see. So Konami put a young man named Hideo Kojima in charge of redefining this game. And so he did. He turned it into Metal Gear.
Metal Gear, Metal Gear.
Metal Gear.
A game where you would play as a character called Solid Snake, whose objective was to infiltrate a fortress known as Outer Heaven, and Operation Intrude N313. This was a sneaking game. It wasn't the first of its kind. I would like to make that perfectly clear. There is a habit among some people of declaring certain games as being the first. They will say, for example, that Metal Gear was the first sneaking game, when there are plenty of examples going back to 1981 at least of there being such games, for example Castle Wolfenstein. Or some would say that Super Mario Bros. Was the first video game to tell a story, which is another blatant lie perpetuated by certain people for unknown reasons. But it can't be denied that Metal Gear did in fact contribute to defining what a sneaking game is. The entire series helped shape sneaking in video games in general, for better or for worse, mostly for the better. But what's important to note is that Metal Gear was more than just a game about sneaking. It was a game with a very, very in-depth story. Yes, you would spend most of your time just moving around from room to room, dodging baddies, hoping to not get spotted, probably getting killed because the game had an obsession with you having to equip keycards before actually being able to use them on a door, even when you were in a room filled with poisonous gas and you had to keep your gas mask on that same slot where you would equip the keycard. But that's a whole other matter. This was a story told in many ways. It was told through your actions, it was told through dialogue with other characters that you would find throughout the world, and it was told through the radio conversations you would have with different characters, of which you would find out by exploring. You had people that helped you out, you had people that may not have the best interests at heart for you, and you had a sense that although this game had very limited dialogue, it was only a couple of lines, it wasn't gigantic or sprawling or anything like that, that they had put a lot of effort into it. Like, it was a good story with clear goals, clear characters. It was just well made. And again, this is at a time when people were going gaga because in Mario were saving the princess, and that was the most amazing storytelling that people had ever seen. People had never played an Ultima game. What you also have to remember about Metal Gear is that it was a game of exploration. You weren't gonna know what the guards were gonna do most of the time. You weren't gonna know that, oh, there's a guard in that truck that's gonna come out in like 5 seconds, so if I'm not out of sight he's gonna see me and shoot me, or he's gonna sound the alarm and more guards will show up and they're gonna chase me until I get to a safe place. You also had the trouble of, unless you got some binoculars, you wouldn't actually know what was going to be expected in the next room, so you may just walk through a door and come face to face with a guard that would shoot you, and then you have to run around and around and around hoping to dodge them and miss them, and in essence, better off hiding somewhere until things died down. For its time, Metal Gear was impressive, and for its time, Metal Gear had horrible controls. The game required a pixel-perfect accuracy to your movements that is infuriating. And by that I mean that you had to take into account every pixel possible. It seemed like everything in the game, every sprite, every corridor edge, everything had just a couple of more pixels there than you'd think they would. So you couldn't duck out of sight quickly because, oh, you got stuck on that one invisible pixel that's in that corner, or an enemy saw you because the toenail of your character was sticking out from around a grate or something. You also couldn't move diagonally, but then again, no one could in the game, so it did make movement a bit cumbersome, but well, with time, you would get used to it, and you would grow to appreciate its, well, I wouldn't say appreciate, but you would consider its limitations in terms of movement and control to be part of the charm, if you will, part of the difficulty. You'd also hate it, but you would get used to it. Metal Gear was a big hit in Japan. It was a superb game, and heck, even today, it is still kind of okay to play. I am of course referring to the original Metal Gear. Konami saw it in its heart to give Metal Gear to the rest of the world in a different form. It created an NES version that had nothing to do with the original. It's a game where instead of infiltrating outer heaven by going through the water, like you do in pretty much every Metal Gear game, well, most Metal Gear games, you parachute out of a plane with 3 other dudes that are never mentioned and don't really exist. You just parachute there and there's these 3 other dudes that they don't exist. It does keep the same plot with a big boss, with Grey Fox, and it does try to have similar gameplay, but it is just simply an inferior product, an absolutely worse game than the original. And this is what Konami gave to the world. This is what we got on the NES, and this is what we got on the PC, because DOS version was based off the NES one, which is a shame because, you know, the MSX is a PC. But regardless, both versions of the game were a success, and since the game did end with the promise of Big Boss returning, because, and this may be a spoiler for you guys, but Big Boss is the bad guy. He betrayed you. All along, he was guiding you towards your doom, for reasons that will become increasingly more complicated as the series goes on. The series all went on. Konami made a sequel, one entitled Snake's Revenge. This is a bit of a polarizing game. On the one hand, it was not as bad as the NES version of the original game. It was still not great, but it was made in the vein of Metal Gear, with sneaking around, with shooting things in the face, with exploration, but it just didn't have the same kind of feel to it. Which is why this is a game that's not considered canon. Yeah, I know there's a Metal Gear game that's not canon, something that perhaps should have been more common as the franchise continued. And as the legend goes, Hideo Kojima had no idea that Konami made this game until, on a train, he met someone actually working on Snake's Revenge. It was at that moment that he decided that, yeah, I have to make a true sequel for Metal Gear. And he would. To make the situation even more convoluted, both Snake's Revenge and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, not to be confused with Metal Gear Solid 2, which thank God was not called Snake, were released in the year 1990. Same year, barely 4 months apart. Though truthfully at the time there wouldn't be as much confusion because Snake's Revenge was the game that most people got. It was the NES one. It was exported to the world. Solid Snake, on the other hand, that was made for the fans of the original. It was made for the MSX computer. Well, MSX2, which is what the original was also made on, but it's the MSX platform in general. And it was only released for a time in Japan. Technically, it didn't really get released outside of Japan until 2004 in a mobile port. But Metal Gear 2 was the game that truly started the franchise. If you look at Metal Gear 1, you can see a good enough sneaking game for its time. But if you look at Metal Gear 2, you see a Metal Gear Solid game. Starting from the stylized intro that reminds you of a James Bond movie, but with schematics and robots and stuff, and continuing with many of the staples of the series. Gone were the binoculars that will let you see what was in your room. Now you had the radar, which showed you the exact position of the enemies around you and would become ineffective if you were detected. If that exclamation mark appeared over an enemy, well, you had lost the ability to see what was around you. You had to rely on your ability as Solid Snake to either hide in a box somewhere and hope they don't see you, or make sure you have enough rations equipped on you so that you can kill them, and while they are killing you, you will come back constantly because the rations will always regenerate you. Rations that you could shake out of the enemies because it's Metal Gear, you could do that back in the day. Solid Snake was an improvement upon every bit of the game. I mean, absolutely every bit. Sneaking was elevated. Now it mattered on what surface you were moving on. If you were moving on metal surfaces, the enemies could now hear you. You had to crawl over them. You had to walk slowly. Otherwise, they would get question marks over their head and come to investigate. They come to investigate the exact point where they heard the sound coming from, and they did it at 90-degree angles, so you could basically make a noise, hide next to a door, wait for them to come in because they could hear from across the screen, and then just walk behind them because they wouldn't see you. They would just go on a very, very rigid trajectory, and you could do stuff to them. Mean stuff. But it's okay because they could do mean stuff to you too. They could shoot on a diagonal, making combat even more difficult. So sneaking was still the best option out there. When I say the game improved upon everything, I am lying. It did not improve the controls. In my own personal experience, I'd say it made them worse. There was just a delay to some of your actions. Crouching, for example, crawling and switching to normal stance would often involve you walking into an invisible wall for some reason, and it was made in such a way that I never got truly adjusted to it as I did with Metal Gear 1's controls. But still, in terms of quality, in terms of the heft it had, in terms of its grandeur, it was above and beyond the original. You had more dialogue in this. The plot was even deeper now, with more characters. Kaz Miller appeared for the first time in this game. Well, technically he was made just for this game, because Hideo Kojima didn't really plan on making more. He kinda didn't plan on making this one either. Metal Gear is a series where pretty much every game in it was going to be the last, but it never stuck. And Metal Gear 2 was a resounding success. Everybody loved it. It was a masterpiece, to be honest. Again, control issues aside, it is a superb game, and it's one that builds upon the success, upon the qualities of the previous one. It involves exploration, planning, patience, creativity, hiding in a box somewhere and hoping people don't see you when you move, running in circles because the guards are chasing you and you want to find a place that they'll not find you, punching people in the back of the head as they pass around the corner, leaving bombs everywhere just so people can step on them, and of course, fighting a giant robot, because at its core, that is what Metal Gear is about. It is a story of a family of people that are obsessed with cardboard boxes who inevitably end up fighting a giant robot and stabbing each other in the back because they're bastards, or clones, which technically is a clone a bastard? I think, yeah, maybe. However, just because this was meant to be the last game in the series, it doesn't mean that it actually was. Konami wanted another game, and with time, Kojima agreed, and he began work on Metal Gear 3 for the 3DO console, with the plan for it to be released around the year 1994. As you may have guessed by the fact that the 3DO console is not renowned for having a Metal Gear game, that one was never released. Instead, it evolved into something different, something new, something that would cover a brand new dimension, well, mostly in terms of graphics. But about that we'll talk next week. If you're interested in playing the classic Metal Gear games, you can find them all in the various collections that have been available in the last couple of years. though none of them are on PC because Konami hates us and wishes us to be very, very sad people that only have access to Metal Gear Survive and more sadness. Goodbye.